And we are live. Welcome to Awkward Devs number 118. I posted the agenda in the chat already. Lots to cover today. I guess the first thing is obviously the Ropsten issue that happened, I think, on Wednesday. I have a quick summary of it that I've shared a few times before, but at a high level, there was a transaction which was sent from an account, I think, which did not have enough funds to cover the max fee for its transaction. And because of how the assertions were done differently in Geth, Aragon, and Nethermind versus Besu and Open Ethereum, that transaction, which should have been invalid, got mined into a block produced by Geth. And then it was accepted by Aragon and Nethermind, rejected by Besu and Open Ethereum. And because Geth was the only mining client on Ropsten at the time, they were basically the only ones making the chain progressing. So everybody else kind of got stuck on the previous block. Yeah. So, and yeah, it was pretty quick to identify the fix. I think within 1 or 2 hours of somebody noting the issue, there was a PR open in Geth with the fix, and then pretty quickly after in Aragon and Nethermind. And then yesterday, those 3 teams put out a release with a fix for this. The one thing that did take a while that I noted is it took about 6 hours for somebody to notice that Ropsten was stopped. But I guess this was, to notice that, you would have had to be running basically an Open Ethereum node, or looking at Etherscan, which seems to also be relying on Open Ethereum. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess just to start off, if anyone has any comments generally or context they want to add around this. If not, I guess Alexei had some comments in the Alcor Dev agenda. So if people want to scroll down, I won't read the whole thing. But basically, one thing he mentioned is the fact that to resolve this, to repair the Ropsten nodes, miners had to run a full sync rather than like a fast sync. And that we should try to think about, what would we do if something like this happened on mainnet, especially in a spot where, say, Geth is the majority client. They're producing blocks. It obviously takes several hours to have a fix out. Yeah. And I see Martin has his hand up.
Yes. So this is not unprecedented. We've been here before. And when that happened the last time, I don't recall exactly which time, but we had these long chains. And I think it was also on Ropsten, and it was a pain in the ass to sync, because when Geth and I guess all the clients do the fast sync and snap sync, we just select the heaviest one and we just jump ahead to a state close to the head. And thereby, we wind up on the wrong side of the fork, because that's the highest one. And what we did back then in Geth is we added this command line flag called the whitelist, which is a comma-separated block number to hash mappings to enforce. So you can basically start Geth saying at block number something, I want to have the hash something. And when Geth then pairs with someone else, Geth will ask what hash do you have for this number, or rather give me this number, and it checks the hash if it is what it expects. And that means that Geth will basically enter a mode where it only will speak to peers having on the desired chain. It's a clumsy. I mean, it's not ideal. It's pretty bad UX, but it's otherwise kind of hard to know. I mean, the operator needs to step in and say, I don't actually want the highest difficulty chain. I want the other one. And I don't really know how we can make the UX better, but this is kind of the best idea we had at the time. So it is possible to handle this scenario. If anyone has better ideas, I'm open to hear them, and if not, I think it would be good if other clients also have something like this.
So he's not here, but Alexei said Aragon is working on a way to go back before any black block in the past and kind of I guess,
Yeah. So
reset from there. Yeah.
we do have set head in Geth, and one thing we did consider previously was if we should add like the fork block -1, if there's like a known fork, should we do an explicit flush of the state so you can always go back? That can be done, but it's kind of might be a bad idea if all the nodes on the entire network does an operation at the same time, even if it's a network flush, but because it can have macro effects where the entire network becomes slow. Although I don't really know how otherwise to do it. If you have an unintentional fork, I mean, either you always flush and you basically run in archive mode and you have every state always. Other than that, it's yeah. I don't know how one would implement what he says other than what we already do. I mean, you can do set head in Geth. It will rewind to whatever state you have. It might have to go back 4,000 blocks to the last time you flushed. It might have to go back up to like 2 hours of processing time. But that's kind of, yeah, that's where we're at. And I don't really see how we can improve it.
Got it. Marius, you also have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's not 100% accurate what Alexei said, because I did set head before the fork block with my node that was snap synced. So it's definitely possible if you have. I think when I heard about the fork, I immediately set my node into archive mode to sync the chain, and so I had the states available before set head. So it's basically it's not really part of the synchronization mode, but if you have the state available, and because I had the state available, I could actually set head before that. But
yeah, and it's basically you can wind up in two things can happen. Either you were syncing, or I mean the fork has happened and now you want to sync. You want to avoid landing on the wrong chain because your pivot block will be after the fork, and you can use the whitelist block for that. The other case is that you did sync, you followed the wrong chain, which means you did sync, so your pivot block is earlier than the fork block, and then you followed the wrong chain. You discover, oh, I'm on the wrong chain. You update your Geth, and now you can always do a set head back to the pivot block. And you're guaranteed to have the state for your pivot block, and probably some other nice locations afterwards. But so both of those situations are resolvable with Geth.
Would it be possible for either of you, Marius or Martin, to basically add a comment by that in the postmortem? So I'm gonna move the postmortem from my hackmd over to the ETH1 specs repo today. But I think it would be valuable if we can just have just Marius maybe explaining kind of what you did on your node, because if in the future something else like this happens, then at least we'll have some instructions about how to deal with it.
Yep.
Cool.
I can write on the agenda.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Then I can move it over to the postmortem and make sure it's documented there. Did anyone else have just thoughts, comments about the Ropsten issue? Oh, I see we have Jeffrey. Oh, no.
There, I just wanted to chime in. I'm from the group that actually mined the block that had the problem. Okay. And we were working with trying to figure out how to come back and fix it. And I would just say that the instructions, there was just a lot of, we weren't sure, should we do a debug set head? Why wasn't it working? So I think just kind of like a flow chart that would say what to do in this situation for Geth miners would be extremely helpful. But given with what Geth already had in it, we were able to repair it and get the mining and get the chain going again.
Yeah, one thing I think might be hard is knowing what is my pivot block and how far can I go back. And that's it's not trivial.
Yeah, and currently the experience is Geth sort of just either crashes or you get error messages that don't tell you what. So just maybe just a in case of emergency break this glass sort of post in the postmortem to tell miners what to do, I think would be sufficient.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Jeffrey. Anyone else have anything they wanted to add or bring up?
I think the fork is not really not really resolved yet. So if you have any spare mining power to work on the real chain, then, or if you still have mining power on the old chain, if you ran a miner before the fork happened and you didn't hear about the fork yet, then please shut down your miner, update your node, and mine the new chain with us.
Yeah. And it's worth noting, so for Ropsten, I believe Geth and Besu are the two clients, and Open Ethereum are the three clients actually that can mine on it. Any other comments?
We should also update the sealers on all the other chains to versions that have the fix.
Yes, that's right. So for Rinkeby, I think the Get team has all the sealers there. Is that correct?
No, we don't have all the seeders on Rinkeby.
Okay, so I guess to any seeders on Rinkeby, they need to update to 1.10.6, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then for Gordy, there is like a wide set of validators across a wide set of clients. So just for this to be clear, if you're a validator on Gordy using Geth, the version is 1.10.6. If you're using Aragon, I'm not sure there's any of them, but still 2021.07.04-alpha. And if you're using Nethermind, v1.10.79. All of these are linked in the postmortem, obviously, and I'll make sure to have an update in the London announcement blog post on blog.ethereum.org later today, which has updated versions listed there. Any other comments? Okay, so I guess one thing that's been kind of implicit, but I just want to make sure there's no objections or thoughts about, is the fork block for London. So all three releases from Geth, Nethermind, and Aragon kept the current block for August 4th or 5th that we're looking at right now. Does everyone just still think this is the right approach? Obviously, we found this on a testnet, which is good, and we've added tests to catch this. Yeah, do people still feel comfortable, or does anyone have a concern with going forward with the current block? Once, twice. Okay. Okay, so then for anyone listening, just to make it clear, the fork block for mainnet for London hasn't changed. The versions for Geth, Aragon, and Nethermind have, so you can see them in the agenda for today. And I'll make sure to update the London announcement blog post and share that on social media and whatnot with a note about this, just so it's clear. Cool. So second thing on the agenda, this was is Micah on? Yes. So on the last call, we discussed basically the gas price field for 1559 transactions, and to recap, the implementation is 1559 transactions contain a gas price field right now. In order to maintain backward compatibility with tooling. But because you can't actually know what the gas price is of a 1559 transaction before it mines, be in mind the transaction's gas price will reflect the max fee per gas, and after it's been mined, it will reflect the effective gas price, which is the amount that it actually paid based on the current block's base fee. Micah's concerned, if I understand it correctly, is it's very bad to have an API which can return, or a field basically which can return a different value based on time and the state, and that'll lead to it being very hard to debug. Micah, did I get that roughly right?
Yeah, I can finish up if you want.
Sure.
So what Tim said is basically the short summary. And anytime you're debugging an issue and the behavior changes based on when you look at it, that becomes a very, very hard bug to debug. I suspect that most users and dApp developers and library authors and whatnot probably are not watching closely on these things, and they will not realize that there's a change in behavior in the gas price field. And so this will be an implicit behavior change, which, if we accept, should at least be something that doesn't result in like this really long tail of hard to debug problems where like my app kind of works sometimes, doesn't work other times. Every time a user reports it, then when I go to check later, it works fine. I can never reproduce it myself. Like that's what we're going to see if we go forward with this kind of behavior change, I think. My proposal is to just have, as an alternative, is to just have the max fee be always returned as the gas price, even after the transaction's mined, because at least that way, like you have consistent data being returned, and if a dApp breaks or something because of that, they can easily figure it out and fix it. Unlike the current behavior, which is the dApp will still break, just it will break sometimes and only for some users and only in some contexts. And I would also like to, I believe you guys talked about deprecating this field. It'd be nice if we put an end of life date on it, like maybe the first patch after Shanghai or something, just so people have like a clear timeline and they know, is this something that I need to deal with removing from my software soon, or can I put it off? I think just saying is deprecated for a lot of people means, oh, this is going to live forever, because sadly in software that's very common. So those two things, I'd like to get an actual end-of-life policy, whatever that is, don't care, but I think there should be one. And I think we shouldn't have this behavior where the return value changes based on time and context.
I disagree.
On which points? On both, or just on the value changing?
Well, we do have an EVM opcode called gas price, right? Unless I'm mistaken.
Sorry, say that again. You have a what?
An EVM opcode for gas price.
Yes, but we don't know what that's going to return until after the transaction mines.
Yes. But when the transaction actually is included in the block, we do know the effective gas price. And I think I don't see why we would not include that information for a transaction where we do know it's the effective gas price and use it as gas price.
So the long term, I think the right place for that sort of information is in the receipt. Like, so get transaction receipt returns values that are only available after mining. So that includes the effective gas price and status, for example. And there's a couple other things that are not known until afterwards. And that makes it so there's very clear behavior for app developers. And so they know that, hey, if I want some piece of information that is only available after mining, then I get that from the receipt. If I want information about the transaction itself, which is available before mining, so basically the stuff in the transaction, then I get that from like get transaction or whatever. I think long term, I think that's the right behavior. Do we agree on that at least?
Yes.
Okay, so then the question then is left, what do we do in the meantime so we don't break people? I'm generally convinced that we shouldn't just return nothing for that field, because there are a lot of people that use gas price for things. And if we just didn't return it for 1559 transactions, those tools would break. I feel like, though, given the two options of return two different values depending on whether the transaction is mined or not, I think that one's going to result in a lot more pain for app developers, just because of the debugging problem. I guess the question is, do we want a solution that is easy to debug but more likely to fail, or do we want a solution that fails less often, but when it does fail, it's much harder to debug? I think maybe that's the trade-off here.
Yeah, and I think maybe us client developers are not the ones who have much at stake here. I mean, as a Get developer, it's like we don't really care if we do this way or the other way, but it might be important for people like Infura or people who are actually using APIs a lot.
So, yeah, I guess two thoughts on that. One, next Friday, Trent and I were going to organize another infrastructure call to get basically these projects who are adding support for 1559 and London in general right now, and answer their questions. So that's definitely something we can bring up there. The second thing is basically every client has a version out for London now that has this kind of changing behavior implemented, right? Where it goes from the max fee to the effective gas price. So I suspect there are already some projects that have started doing this, and it might be the worst of both worlds if in some minor release, Geth or Besu or whatnot changes the behavior, because then it's like you'll have some versions that have, like, you'll have basically a different behavior based on which non-consensus breaking change version of a client you're using. So I suspect if we really do want to make this change, it's almost like you need to, it's like you need to tell people use this version for the hard fork in a way, because otherwise you'll be in a spot where there's just a lot of inconsistency.
But yeah, but related to this, aren't there also other fields which are added for transactions which have been included in the block?
Yes, like the transaction index and
yes,
the
and
block
maybe
hash,
even
block
the
number.
block number. Yeah. I mean, all those three should
I would love to
treated
see
the
all those
same,
move
right?
to the receipt. I would love to see all those move to the receipt for the reasons I mentioned before. Like having the transaction return like a static set of fields that are define the transaction, and then the receipt return all the things that you know later. That would be my preference long term. I'm okay with like a dragged out deprecation strategy for moving to that, because I recognize it's not easy to just switch.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to switch, but then whenever we do API changes, yes, a lot of people get angry.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
So if we do go forward with switching context a little bit, is everybody okay with setting a clear end of life policy, like a tentative date, such as first release after Shanghai will remove this thing, or whenever that is? That would make me at least a little more comfortable, because it makes it more clear to people that, hey, the real solution here is to stop using this field, and it is going away in a real time. Like I said, just when you say a thing is deprecated, I've found that people usually continue to use it until there's an end-of-life policy in place. Because in software, people deprecate things all the time, and then they stick around for 7 years.
It sounds good to me.
And Micah, you're proposing basically waiting until the release after Shanghai. So that means that the gas price field would be supported basically up to the upgrade after Shanghai, right?
Without having to lose access to that field. However, if you want to run a client that's compatible with the next hard fork, then you're going to have to fix your stuff.
Yes, exactly. But we're not asking people to fix their stuff before Shanghai, basically. We're asking them to fix it
Correct.
right after Shanghai.
Yeah. So sometime between Shanghai and the next hard fork. If we chose, patch after Shanghai, then that means that people need to fix their stuff sometime between Shanghai and the next hard fork. So that gives them like a 6 to 12 month window, depending on hard fork timelines. A strong opinion on, time. I care more just that there is one.
What I like about Shanghai is basically we need to have a fork around December this year, right? So I like that we can kind of put a date on it already because of the difficulty bomb. So and it's also like far enough in the future that like clients or applications don't need to deal with this today, but it's, not that far that this sticks around forever. So I would be fine for keeping this until basically the difficulty bomb pushback and removing it in the release after.
Okay, so how about then for path forward, so we can move on with the meeting, we will tentatively say patch after Shanghai is the end of life for this gas price field on 1559 transactions. It will still remain on legacy transactions because it actually is part of the transaction there. People can discuss this in All Core Devs channel and Discord if you have additional thoughts after the call. Separately, let's talk to the app developers in the call you mentioned next week and see if anyone have strong opinions. If we're going to be deprecating this in the next 6 months, I'm more okay with just having this weird kind of behavior that we currently have, just because I know it's going away and we can just tell people when they run into these bugs, sorry. And we did our best to give you something that kind of was a stopgap, but you really shouldn't use this field.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I'll also bring up the timeline on the call next Friday with them to see if anybody has a strong reason why that would be too quick or something. Cool. Anything else on that?
Not for me.
Okay. So next topic. Oh, Rai, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually, before we wanted to move on, I just wanted to ask a question about a possible bug in Geth after mainnet forks. I was just curious what people's expectations are for the dynamics around miners and the community if there is a bug in Geth. As someone who's relatively new to the space, wasn't around for what I heard was a bug getting enshrined in parity. I just wanted to understand, how people think this would go down.
Poorly.
I think we should just recognize the current reality and make it so that if there is a consensus issue and Geth is in the wrong, then everyone else corrects the way so that it is the same way as Geth, and we just added the yellow paper to account for the quirk specifically for Geth.
It would be great if, I kind of agree with Artem that I suspect that is how it will go in reality. It would be great if we could avoid that, though, just because it just means we now have this technical debt that we're going to struggle to get rid of for probably a long time, depending on the bug. Some bugs, you can pay off the technical debt next hard fork or whatever. But I do worry about introducing technical debt because of a bug introduced in Geth. That would suck.
I'm afraid it will be too painful for the mainnet, especially since mainnet, by the time we recognize the bug, find the bug, the mainnet will basically chew billions of dollars by that time. And it will be inevitable that this bug will just be written into history, written to the annals, and recognized as a quirk in Ethereum history, and that's it.
So there is another I mean, yeah, there is also an added complexity. I mean, even if we were to say that, yeah, Artem's proposal, that's what we're going to do, there can also be that the bug is only in get latest version, and 40% run that, or 50 or 60, but in older version, the bug is not there. So it's not only the case that we may have, Geth splits off from the rest. We can have Geth splits off from Geth and the rest. So we still might get very complex scenarios.
I think it should generally be go with the majority chain, and that's it.
Yeah, I would not commit to do that in right before knowing what the bug is, because if we decide to leave a bug there, it might be able to, to be used in ways that make it a denial of service vector. It might be able to, without knowing what the bug is, it's kind of hard to.
Right. That the majority chain could have printed 100 million Ether, and we probably will not follow that.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a case. We know that there was a bug in both Geth and Parity, which was discovered after the fact, and the ripe MD touch delete, which was not deleted because it was a precompile. And to say that we'll just amend the yellow paper, that we haven't actually managed to do that. We haven't fully been able to describe the scenarios where this behavior, how to describe this behavior. Is it something special about RIPE-MD? Is it something special about whether the rollback happens in the outer transaction or in an internal transaction, or is it something magic with precompiles? It can be very difficult to, retroactively. So I don't know. I think it's difficult to. I mean, it's good that we plan it and discuss it, but I don't really think I cannot really commit to any particular strategy right beforehand, before knowing more facts about it.
This discussion, it would be so much easier if we had a thing like regenesis on the table, where we could, not fix Go Ethereum, not roll back the mainnet, but instead have this quirk enshrined, and then have regenesis after some time, which would erase that quirk from the code of all implementations, where we could fix the implementations, remove the past complexity by just setting a new Genesis block, basically, with the current state.
I think that's what we're looking into, a state expiry.
There are two parts to this proposal. One is just regenesis, basically setting the new Genesis block. And the other one is shadowing the inactive state, the state expiry. These are two parts of one big proposal, basically.
So, on this vein of topic, do we have any ideas or thoughts or plans or strategies for maybe trying to get more client diversity in miners or validators in the future? Or maybe Danny knows, do we expect more client diversity in validators for consensus proof of stake?
I think we have a bit more diversity right now, and it is still trending in a positive direction, but it's hard to say.
It's probably to be determined yet what the execution client distribution is going to be like.
That's true.
It's going to be probably paired with, the consensus client.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
good point. So I
suspect
guess we
there's
want
not, like,
ideally we would want even.
I was just gonna say, I suspect because of like switching costs, right? There's not like a magical thing that will happen where the client diversity resets after the merge, just because if you're already using Geth or you're already using Nethermind, and the goal of the merge is to minimize the amount of I guess changes for application developers, then you know, yeah, you'll be in a spot where you don't really have to change your.
Yes, but I think we actually do have a little better client diversity in non-mining clients, partly because not all clients can mine. And so like Nethermine, for example, there are 0 mining Nethermine clients, but there are non-zero non-mining.
That's true.
I think the actual players in the merge are going to be somewhat different. It's not going to be a domination of just a handful of pools.
Yeah, and William had a comment in the chat about MEV, right? Like that's another big factor into client diversity. So clients that are obviously optimized to capture MEV, there's just like a higher incentive to use them, and especially so after the merge. Yeah. So first, I guess, any other thoughts, comments on Rai's original question?
Do we think there's like, is there some number of hours that we think miners would roll back, even if we didn't, like if we did have the worst case where Geth doesn't disagree with older Geth clients and everyone goes one side? Or is it kind of like as soon as it happens, no matter how fast the fix goes out, we're screwed?
I think as Martin indicated earlier, it depends on the severity of the bug. Like if it was a bug that printed 10 million ETH, then I think we'd probably roll back no matter how long it took. If it was something like, it's annoying, it caused a desync, but things continued functioning properly, then it's more likely that we'll just roll forward with it.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess, one kind of factor that's worth noting is just like the time that it takes people to move ETH, right? Like the amount of deposit confirmations on an exchange, for example, or the time that it takes to make like a Uniswap trade is on the order of like minutes. And even for the most severe bug, you're on the order of hours to find the bug and put a release out. So there are, in those hours, like Artem said, there's like billions of dollars in settlements that happen. So if anything kind of changes the history there, you're in a spot where you've changed stuff that you basically can't undo, right? Like you're basically double spending on exchanges and undoing a lot of other activity that's happened on chain.
Yeah, but I mean, there's always been the notion, right? If you run an exchange, you should run multiple clients,
Yes.
and you should detect when they are not in sync and halt the deposits or withdrawals, and take steps. But yeah, we've always been open with Ethereum that there can be forks and there will be consensus issues. And there's a possibility of that. We don't have the reference client.
To be honest, I think that even in the case of someone printing 100 million ETH, the better way forward would be to just have something like DAO hard fork number 2 than to roll back the chain. Because if we roll back even by hours, this would completely destroy Ethereum's reputation, basically, as a reliable platform.
DAO hard fork number 2 wouldn't necessarily be possible. I think that was possible because of the peculiarities of the capital being locked for some amount of time, whereas many versions of such a bug would result in many transfers, sent to exchanges, Uniswap trades, all that kind of stuff. So I really, I mean, I don't think that we can come to a like conclusion as to how we would proceed. I think there are just many options for the many types of bugs and many types of peculiarities that will emerge.
Yeah, just to briefly point out, I mean, there's nothing that's that's particularly special about along this chain, right? So as soon as the rules the chains follow diverge anyway, then some exchanges might be on one chain and some exchanges might be on a different chain, and to me it seems like it was always kind of the obvious part of the social contract around Ethereum that if you end up on a chain that does not follow the Ethereum rules, you're just not on the canonical Ethereum chain. And like maybe potentially if it's a super small difference to the canonical rules and it doesn't matter, it could be that we end up just kind of accepting that as the canonical chain retroactively, but I don't think it makes sense at all to kind of have any standardized expectations around that behavior.
I have one more comment.
Yep.
So it's instead of just generalizing, so let's say, for example, this bug that we had on Ropsten, if that had happened on London, I would totally accept if we just decided to change the rules and allow it, because the only side effect would, well, a transaction made it into a block. The transaction did fully cover all its own expenses. It had the balance for the effective gas. It just failed a check, which is not really that important. And I would totally be in favor to just, okay, we don't have to actually rewind mainnet for that. But yeah, I wouldn't make it a general rule.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Ryan, do you feel like we've answered your question, or does anyone else have any comments or concerns about this?
Yeah,
maybe
I'm just glad I brought it up. I wanted. Oh yeah, go on, Ansgar.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to have a quick question. Would there be room for like some sort of Oracle system to quickly kind of inform stakeholders that there's some sort of consensus issue? Like, I mean, of course, ideally exchanges and everyone should run multiple different clients, but could there, I don't know if that really makes any sense at all, but could there be some way to kind of like very efficiently inform people that now it would be a time to be very careful? I don't know.
Yeah, we could. I mean, something like the Forkmon. If you could subscribe to events from the Forkmon, for example, or if people built alternatives to the Forkmon, that's what it's there for.
It sounds like a great product idea and business opportunity for someone listening on the call.
Yes, and I suspect a lot of exchanges or other infrastructures basically have something like Forkmon, and that says if you see a bad block, just pause everything until a human investigates.
I would say some rather than a lot, based off of my conversations.
I'm fairly certain that Infura has one. And if anyone wants to add the feature to the existing Forkmon, the repository, I think, has been moved to Ethereum. So it's like node monitor. PRs are welcome. Otherwise, we can try to extend it ourselves. It might not be, it might not be done next week, but surely something we can look into.
I know there's a core dev apprenticeship program going on right now.
Yeah.
So if you are a core dev apprentice, this seems like a pretty low hanging fruit that provides a ton of value to the ecosystem. And if you're not sure how to get started, just ask in the Discord and somebody will help you. Cool. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for bringing this up, Rye. I think this was a pretty valuable conversation to have. Okay, so next up on the agenda, another big topic. So we talked a couple calls ago about potentially working on Shanghai and the merge in parallel. On the last call, we briefly touched on it, but not too much. And I guess I was just looking at dates, and it feels like at a high level, we basically need to decide either today or on the next call if we plan to do more in Shanghai than just a difficulty bomb pushback. The reason behind that is obviously if we just do a difficulty bomb pushback, this is not something we need to deploy on testnets before mainnet because they don't have a difficulty bomb. It's obviously kind of a one-line change. It's something that's easy to test and whatnot, so we don't need to like add complex new features in clients. So, you know, we basically don't have to decide if we do it and for how long, probably until October or something. On the other hand, if we did want to include new EIPs alongside this difficulty bomb pushback, which has to happen sometime early December, then we'd basically need to have the final list of EIPs chosen like in the next 2 weeks so that we can then start implementing them, testing them, having an upgrade on testnet, and then having an upgrade on mainnet. And it's also worth noting, you know, if we do want to focus on the merge, client teams can't do everything. So it's not clear that, you know, it's not clear what's the capacity to say do those things in parallel and how much that would push back the progress on the merge. So I guess, yeah, so there's a comment in the chat about saying, are we certain that the merge this year is no longer an option? We don't know. But regardless of that, you know, it's like if we work on something else and not the merge, we probably push back, you know, the merge more. So yeah, I guess I'm curious what different client teams think about all that. The idea of like Shanghai versus kind of Muir Glacier Part 2 versus the merge. Yeah.
I think we should do Shanghai.
And by Shanghai, you mean like a feature fork?
Yes, a feature fork. I mean, there is at least one EIP that I would like to see in, that is the Ethereum object format for EVM. But maybe we should also include something else.
Are you speaking for Aragon? I mean, does Alexia also feel that way? Do you know?
Right now, I'm speaking for me personally, but I would suspect that that would be his position too.
One thing to keep in mind with the Ethereum object format is it keeps coming up as a potential long-term solution for some hard problems like state expiry. And so it is part of, you can consider it, I think, part of long-term feature development. Like it's an iterative step, but it's not just like a one-off like little thing. It's like it enables some bigger things down the road. This is EIP number, I don't know off the top of my head, sorry. 3670.
Awesome.
Oh, Thomas, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sure. I think it would be great to keep pushing for the testnet for the merge in October after some of the workshops and meetings. So I know it would be a very short term, but at the same time, we expect that end of September, some big push should happen from all client teams. And then I believe that if testnet happens, then there'll be a period of time when many infrastructure providers and users and apps will be experimenting with it, while the core devs may refocus for a moment on the Shanghai fork. And I would probably be happy to see it to introduce some of the EIPs that were proposed. And I was looking today at this object format, I remember that many teams were suggesting it was important, and I think it might be reasonable to take it into account.
So basically, just to make sure I understand, you're saying, we get merge testnets up as soon as possible. You suspect we might be able to do that before October, and it's like when October comes, then and the testnets are up, then you think we would have more bandwidth to work on, kind of a feature Shanghai.
I think that maybe end of October testnet is more likely, and then if we manage to keep Shanghai reasonably slim, and the outside of core devs will be enough of the analysis of those EIPs that one or two may hit the Shanghai, and the other ones may be proposed for Cancun for next year.
Got it. Besu, any thoughts?
Sorry, I was distracted by something. What was the question?
Any thoughts on basically Shanghai versus the merge versus Muir Glacier Part 2?
For December?
Yes. Well, I mean, not necessarily committing to having the merge in December, but whether, our focus right now should be on, just focusing on the merge, trying to potentially add features for Shanghai in parallel, or any other thoughts?
I'm leaning towards focusing on the merge.
Okay.
I have a couple quick comments. One, I think getting to the other side of London, spending some time with the new merge EIP and accompanying other specs, through September is going to give us probably much better information. And I also will say that a number of researchers and developers certainly are stretched thin, and committing to a fork at the end of the year and committing to driving headfirst towards the merge at the same time seems like committing to a lot of work that we often kind of get into and then realize we have too much on our plates. So
yeah, so it seems like I agree. We tend to overcommit to stuff, and even I think London was an example where we tried to keep things small and it kind of grew. So I suspect whatever we commit to will end up being bigger than what we kind of agreed to upfront. It seems like everyone is kind of aligned on focusing on the merge, and there's some disagreement about when and how we might be able to focus on something else. So perhaps it probably makes the most sense to obviously get London out the door, which will happen in the next couple of weeks. Then spend time going over kind of the merge requirements and whatnot, and we can maybe make a more informed decision after that. And it's just worth noting that at some point it becomes kind of unfeasible to implement, test, deploy stuff on testnet and deploy it to mainnet. But we don't necessarily have to make that call today.
And a couple of months ago, we discussed queuing up a feature fork in terms of vetting proposals and kind of figuring out what that would look like. And I would say, regardless of when Shanghai does land, it's probably good we can have that conversation in parallel to the merge without having to do an incredible amount of technical work on it. And so the overhead of planning for that is probably low, whereas the overhead of actually releasing it on a certain timeline that's when a lot of the work comes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Micah, you have your hand up?
Just as a reminder, Shanghai will happen this fall because we have to move the difficulty bomb. It's just a question of whether it has interesting things in it besides that. Also, do client developers currently have an idea of how difficult the EVM object format implementation is? Is this one of those things that's trivially easy, or this is a big project?
Marius said, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so we talked about one of them code validation, which is 3670, which is kind of small and neat. But it also requires 3540, which is the EOF v1. I think it's non-trivial to implement, and I think it's non-trivial to make test cases for. But I'm fully supportive of it, and I think it's good, and it's going in the right direction. But yeah, I would prefer to focus on the merge for the next.
That's very valuable. That's what I was looking for, just like a gut feeling on complexity.
And I guess, yeah, you had another point about like Shanghai will happen, in December. Axic had a comment about that where like, maybe for clarity, if we want to, if we want to target difficulty bomb only fork in December, maybe we don't call that Shanghai and we call it some like 2-word name like we did for Muir Glacier. His proposal, I think, was Arctic Glacier or something like that. So that might be like an easier way to differentiate between them, kind of saying that, the merge is obviously kind of bringing proof of stake over to the current EVM chain. Maybe we have Shanghai, which is the set of features, and we have, something else, call it Arctic Glacier, which is just a difficulty bomb pushback. And 2 of those things might happen at the same time, right? Like, or I guess if we were in a spot where the merge happened in December, we just don't need this kind of Muir Glacier part 2. But if we are in a spot where in December we feel like, we want to do both the difficulty bomb pushback and add some feature, we can just have, kind of merge those 2 hard forks, but have Shanghai only refer to like actual functionality improvements, so that it's clearer for EIP champions, like, like we maybe don't know when Shanghai is, but we know that, these set of changes will come together on the network. I see there's a +1 from Martin in the chat. Is that about having kind of the 3 different names, like merge, Shanghai, and...
No, it was a comment to Andre that he has an implementation of 3540, which is cool and really good.
I think that's a good naming distinction, Tim.
Okay, so yeah, I guess, does anyone disagree with having the 3 names? And worst case, if we do have Shanghai with features at the same time as this difficulty bomb hard fork, we can just merge those 2 specs into one.
I do, but I've already expressed them many times before, and so I don't need to reiterate them.
So just to be clear, you'd rather it be called Shanghai no matter what's in it?
In the fall of 2021. We don't know what that's going to contain, but that's what we call the thing that happens in 2021. It's a very different strategy. That's my strong preference. But
Thomas, you have an ambiguous comment in the chat as well. So which option do you prefer?
So one question, because you keep saying the fall. Isn't it not to happen in December?
Yes.
Which would be winter?
No, sorry. It depends on your region, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to confirm. It's just a matter of geographical approach. Okay.
So Thomas, you prefer calling whatever happens in December Shanghai, right?
Yeah, I think it helps community to understand that they can at least vote for things to be in there or not, and when it happens chronologically.
Okay, I don't have a strong opinion, so if people prefer that to keep Shanghai, I guess, William, there's one opposition to keeping Shanghai referring to the feature fork, but yeah.
I would also oppose. I would also say that it's cooler to have the 3 different names and merge them if needed, and to keep Shanghai as the feature fork, regardless of whether it happens in December or Q1 2022.
Yeah, I would oppose the opposition. I also lean towards having whatever's in the next fork. We don't know what's in it, but it's Shanghai. I think it makes it easier.
Okay, I guess this seems pretty split. This is like a weird way to phrase the questions, but do people is it worth bringing this to say like the infrastructure caller and all core devs and actually talking more with people who propose EIPs than with core devs and kind of see what they prefer? Because I guess it feels like in a way, we will kind of figure it out no matter what it is. And it's kind of our job to stay on top of this thing. But maybe kind of the perspective of the people who are actually submitting stuff into these is, what makes it easier for them. So
I think it also has an impact on just the broader community. People often talk about London, for example, long before London comes out, and so I think they also are stakeholders that matter. Like it shows up in news articles, it shows up in chat rooms, it shows up in Twitter tweets. Like these names show up everywhere, and they affect a lot of people.
So with that being said, do you think the time like having Shanghai in December it's just easier for people to keep track of?
That's my feeling, but like if we wanted to solicit external opinions, I think that we should extend beyond just EIP authors and also see if we can get feelings from the broader community, which I know is extremely hard.
Sorry, but didn't we kind of decide to use the DevCon sites as the name for hard forks just so we wouldn't have to be bike shedding about names so much in the future? I don't really see why we should deviate from that.
On that, when we did Istanbul, that was the first time when we decided that we will be following that DevCon names. And right after Istanbul, we did Muir Glacier because that was just the one single fork to push the difficulty bomb. And I feel that it makes sense. If it is only for difficulty bomb, we should have something like that was proposed, like our Arctic Glacier, just to be in sync that, okay, fine, it is just for difficulty bomb, and for all other feature folks that are very important for people to upgrade their nodes, especially like with the latest version of client, it makes sense to go ahead with the DevCon. I mean, that's just my thought, and it's not like very, very hard.
Yeah, it's not a hill I want to die on. I think I can accept whatever actually.
Yeah, so for me, it's also not a hill I want to die on. Just my idea would be if like we start pushing for a feature fork called Shanghai, and we then realize that and we say Shanghai is going to happen in December, and we then realize that we cannot really do the feature fork in December, and then have to, I don't know, either kick the EIPs out of Shanghai. I think then naming the feature fork Shanghai and moving it would be better in my opinion than basically taking out all of the EIPs that we said are going to be in Shanghai.
Yeah, I think the way around that is we just don't commit anything to Shanghai, until we get there. It does feels like, yeah, it's starting to get like bike shedding. I'm not sure there's, yeah, I guess, yeah, I'll start a thread on ETH Magicians just to get kind of broader feedback on it. And if people have strong opinions, I think this is kind of like the last time we can voice them. Yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to discuss much more on the call. Like Client, you have your hand up? we can't hear you if you're speaking. Oh, sorry about that. If you want to come back with your comment when your mic works, we can have it later. Okay, so to change gears completely from bike shedding, this week Mikael opened a proper EIP for the merge, so EIP 3675, and he wanted to take a couple minutes to just kind of present it and potentially get some feedback, or at least point people to it. Yeah, so Mikael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, everyone. So, yeah, this EIP is the specification of the Ethereum network consensus upgrade to the proof of stake, which is driven by the beacon chain. In simple words, is what we know as the merge, and this specification is the minimal viable version of the merge that we have been discussing for like several months already. Like this specification in its basis has like a number of proposals, starting from various Vitalik's proposals from the early and not that early days, going through the separation of concerns between the execution and consensus clients, and executable beacon chain and quick merge via fork choice rule proposals. Also, the ideas from the high-level design for the execution client that has been presented like a few months ago, and the Ryanism spec are also in the basis of this specification. So that's the huge milestone for all the merge efforts and for the merge project, and the result of the contributing of tons of efforts by different researchers and developers, like for about 2 years. Yeah, that's like the brief history overview. So quickly speaking about this particular specification, I'd like to highlight a few things in which this specification is a bit unusual with respect to other EIPs. So first of all, this EIP introduces the new hard fork mechanism that will be used for this EIP only, I guess. There is no predefined hard fork block number. Instead of the block number, the terminal total difficulty will be used. And the first block that reached this terminal total difficulty is considered as the terminal proof of work block. And any blocks that are beyond this terminal proof of work block must be not processed by the nodes that follow the protocol. So for the rationale behind this particular mechanism, see the security consideration section of this document. Also, this terminal total difficulty will be communicated by the consensus layer. So it's not like predefined, it's communicated in the runtime. The other side is that obviously the other thing is that obviously we have like the other side of the logic and specification, which is the consensus layer. It's not specified, it's just mentioned in several like throughout the document in several references, but it's not specified in this EIP. And the abstraction that is used for the consensus layer to be like presented in the spec is the proof of stake events. You may find a section that describes these events. They are a bit tricky, so be careful with reading them. So that's the two like things that I was going to mention. Also, like this is one of the first EIP relating to the merge. The other one, at least, is considered to introduce the deprecation of the difficulty opcode in favor of deprecation of the semantics of existing semantics of difficulty opcode in favor of this opcode to return the randomness accumulated by the beacon chain. So we haven't missed this change. It's just going in the separate EIP. So yeah, that's kind of all. I would like also to hand over to Danny. Probably he has more comments.
No, I mean, I think you hit the high points. Specifically, these events allow this specification to black box the functionality provided by the beacon chain. Obviously, that spec is handled entirely in the ETO specs. And from a practicality standpoint, the functionality will likely be handled from a client on that side. And those events, although we don't really bring up like the fact that there'll be a consensus API, those events map to things that would be coming from that consensus API that we've worked a bit with in the past. I don't know. Yeah, I think that this should read pretty cleanly if you're used to EIPs and you're familiar with the inner workings of an ETH1 client today. So, but we'd love any feedback and discussions, and this is a starting point. We'll iterate from there.
I have a question. So obviously the block structure is not changed, and we have the hard-coded Ketchak for the empty list, and we have a lot of zeros for the mix hash, a lot of zeros for the nonce, etc. How come we're so afraid of modifying the header?
I mean, this is a good discussion point that we can get into. We're not terribly afraid. When we do modify those, the modifications ripple outward, not just from the client, but into user layer APIs and libraries and things like that. So it does probably have a more impact on the infrastructure providers and isn't as self-contained within consensus. So I think that's definitely one of the things I would want to contemplate before doing deeper changes, but they're on the table. We can certainly discuss them. And I guess given 1559 and coordination around libraries and infrastructure providers, people that have gone through that process here would have a better handle on what such complexities might introduce and how much work it will be for the ecosystem. I think if we don't make some of those changes, it's a pretty nice user story, and that would be, I think that's my primary argument for not making them.
Yeah, I guess the counter to that is if we don't do it, you're kind of stuck with these fields for, potentially forever.
For as long as we leave them in there.
Yeah. I guess, that's maybe a good question to have with some sort of merge infrastructure call. Like, is it better to have the smallest set of breaking changes, or is it better to basically, do stuff like changing the block format then, because anyways people are updating their infrastructure and whatnot?
Changing the block format. If we do want to go this route, we will have to consider that there are existing applications that potentially can use the existing block format to validate this, like receipt route and transaction route, and even as like state route by taking the block header, verifying it with the block hash of code, and parsing it according to the block structure that we have now, and then using this data anyhow. So like if we drop some fields at the end of the block header, it might not break these applications, but anyway, we should consider this.
Right. You mean like if we have some on-chain validation of previous headers, it might be worth looking into how much of those exist and how they're written.
Right. That's kind of like, well, not quite the same, but any sort of validations against against the hash and the state root are likely to be broken at some point, and hopefully there's not a ton of that on chain. Lucas?
So we were discussing in the context of London potential bugs, issues, and like rollbacks and etc. So I'm not sure if there is anything we can anticipate with going to proof of stake that we might roll back to proof of work, for example. But again, modifying more things like block headers, etc., would make this even more complicated.
Right, that's fair. And I do think that's a decent amount of the work to do over the next few months is better. And I think the security considerations and different paths available are in a number of our heads, but we want to spend a lot of time writing that down and working through contingencies and that kind of stuff. As you can see, further threat analysis at the bottom is TBD.
Any other, I guess, questions or comments on the IP? I saw there was a discussion about mining in the comments. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just like to follow up on that last question. One more thing. So with the E2, there is the concept of finalization, right? So if the majority ETH1 client produces an invalid or incorrect state root, and it gets accepted and eventually finalized. So what would be what's the timeline between that invalid state being included and it being finalized? And after that, would it be in any way possible to roll back finalized state, or do we say that no, finalized?
So finality happens in the normal case in 2 epochs, which is about 12.5 minutes. And there's a couple of things there. So if a majority client or set of clients that represented a 2/3 majority did have some invalid state transition that they agreed upon and they were able to hit those thresholds, they could finalize such a state. But you end up having a pretty similar thing as in proof of work. If I'm running a client that does not agree with that state transition, I'm just now going to be on a minority chain that is being built, but is not necessarily being finalized. And at the end of the day, you can specify, you can manually override, and certain command line parameters should probably exist to be able to manually override, such that even if something was finalized is, there's something social there, but it's also like a practicality standpoint like that. Unless manual intervention is final and will remain within my chain. But in the event of error, you can always intervene. Go on.
Yeah, I think that social element is going to be pretty large, because I think the presence of the word finalized,
right,
to a lot of users, they don't care about the technicalities. They, it has finalization.
Yeah, I see that. And maybe we should consider a bit more what that path is. I mean, Yeah. Okay. Practically something 100 blocks deep in proof of work is finalized as well, but it doesn't carry the same term.
I don't think so, because you can have a shadow fork that will cause clients to automatically switch after 100 blocks.
I agree. It's finalized from the way that people generally handle it and think about the state there, but it is subject to more attack vectors than a proof of stake finalized chain would be.
I guess just because we're almost at time, what's the best way to continue this conversation? I guess there's a discussion to field in the EAP. We obviously have the Discord for more like synchronous stuff. Anything else, Mikael, Danny, that you think people should kind of keep track of and leave their comments?
I would say those two. There's a merge channel in the Discord that we can specifically talk about. Obviously, a lot of this might ripple out into all core devs at a certain point. And the discussions too is fine. Mikael, is there anything else?
About the calls that are devoted for specific topics. So if we will have something big to discuss, like consensus API that involves both like Beacon Chain and mainnet client developers, I think it makes sense to make a call devoted for this kind of discussion, which will be just announced in advance, and will happen on demand.
And Mikael, you're also implying that we are likely going to deprecate the merge specific call that was regular and move to discussions in all core devs and the ETH2 specific call. And then if we need kind of a breakout room call on a specific topic, we'll do that on demand, right?
Yeah, right. So, and yeah, we are tentatively book this slot that previously used for the merge calls for this kind of breakout sessions.
Great.
Cool. We only have 3 minutes, and Light Client has pointed out a couple times in the chat, we kind of got lost in the bike shedding of the names earlier, but didn't actually get like a super strong commitment on the actual next step and what we want to focus on. So it seemed to me like most people, I think basically everyone, aside from potentially Aragon, really wanted to focus on the merge next. That if we kind of got to a spot where we have merge testnets, that might be a good spot to reevaluate what we can put in Shanghai or whatever we call what happens in December. Does anyone disagree with that? To basically, kind of focus on the merge starting from here, get to a spot where we do have, it implemented in all the clients and it's running on testnets. And depending how much bandwidth we have there, we can possibly do some features for the December upgrade. But if we get there and realize that, we just don't have the bandwidth, then it'll have to move further out. Does that generally make sense to people? Are there any strong objections? Okay, no objection. So I guess, at a high level, let's do that. Unfortunately, so there were 2 EIPs more that people wanted to present on this call, 3670 and 3651. 3670 was from Axic. And I know, William, you kind of sat through this entire call, and you're not, kind of a necessarily regular attendee. So do you want to take like a minute or two to just quickly present your EIP and point people to where, they can interact?
I've shared my prepared statement on Ethereum Magicians and posted the link in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. Cool. And then there were, so next week at basically all core devs time, so exactly 1 week from when this call started, we're going to have 1559 in London call for infrastructure providers. So if you are working on an application, wallet, or any other piece of infrastructure and are in the process of implementing London support and have some questions, please come then and we can try to help you out as much as possible. And lastly, there's 2 Peep and Eep sessions happening that are pretty relevant next week. Pooja, do you want to take 30 seconds and go over those two?
Yeah. To celebrate the Ethereum's 6th anniversary, we are organizing 2 special Peep and Eep, one with EIP 3675, the upgrade consensus that Mikhail just talked about, and that is scheduled on July 27th at 1400 UTC. The another one is going to be, that is not a proposal specific, but a topic that people are looking to learn about, that is block gas limit with Vitalik Buterin on July 30th at 1400 UTC. We are also organizing one call specifically for the London upgrade that is scheduled on 2nd of August at 1400 UTC, where we are inviting all the EIP authors, the client teams, and the infrastructure implementers of those proposals of London. So please join Ethereum Gatherers. Thank you so much.
Cool. Any other final comments, thoughts from anyone? Okay, well, thank you very much, and see you all in 2 weeks. Oh, and upgrade your nodes for London. And keep an eye out for the Ethereum Foundation blog post today or Monday with the release versions. But yes, London will be happening before the next Awkward Fs.
Thank you, Tim.
Cool. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye all.